Morning. I'm James Quinlan Maservi, fantasy author extraordinaire, creator of creatures and a whole lot of other stuff that I can't remember anymore because I'm actually being recorded now. But at the end of the day, I write stories that kindle imagination. I got a logo on there somewhere that explains it all. Anyway, I'm here with JQM Literary Chats with a new author friend of mine, Chris Lodwig. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how's it going?
Oh, I'm well. Well, well enough for when I'm being recorded. But
Yeah.
anyway, anyone
It's
who's been
easier when you
around with
write things than actually have things recorded for you. You just like when you have control over the words and you go, oh, I don't like that. You can't delete when you're talking, so it just makes it a little bit
yeah,
better. So
and of course I had to come up with this big long logo that I have big long motto that I get to say that sounds really good on paper, but I can't make it work when I'm actually recorded.
it's a lot of tongue movement and lip movement to make that
Yep.
happen. I don't have a logo. I don't have a theme, so that it saves me some trouble.
I love my logo. A good friend of mine, fellow author Alicia Scarborough created it for me.
Yeah.
Got it for my wife bought it for me for Christmas last year, and Allie did a fantastic job. Anyway, that's not what we're here for. We're here to listen to Chris, not me ramble about how silly I am when I'm being recorded. So Chris, I'm just going to go through my JQM literary chat questions that I already sent you. First question is, tell us about yourself.
Well, the I'll tell you the uninteresting things first. I work in technology in the greater Seattle area, so I've worked in lots of large companies, and that's about as interesting as that is. I've got a wife, I've got a kid, I've got a dog, and I like to say I've got more shrimp than any one person should have in a house. I don't know where they all came from, but as it turns out, we've got a few of those too. Um, I write sci-fi is what I'm writing. Back behind me here, you can actually see my book that I've written. This is it. It's called Systemic, and and yeah, it's my first published novel that I. It's available up on Amazon, and there's a wonderful audio book version of it that my friend Dave Cruz down in Florida did for me that I'm quite proud of, and so you can get it in either one of those places. And I is it iTunes or one of those places you Mac Books or Apple Books, or I think it's Apple Books is where you can get that. So it's available in all those places, and oh, that's all there is about me.
I'll have the links posted on the website
Okay.
as part of the interview on my thing, guys. So just look over to the just go back over to JQM serve WordPress and you'll find it there. Find all the links there. So what inspired you to write sci-fi?
Oh well, it's a funny story. Nothing actually inspired me to write sci-fi. I What happened was the book just sort of happened in the way that it came out. It needed it needed to be sci-fi is actually the best answer for it. I guess it could have been wizards and magic and some other stuff, but just the themes of the book and what it was dealing with from a plot perspective, it needed to have a sci-fi sort of way of resolving the plot. That said, I mean, I do work in technology, and so there's some things like that, and I read a lot of sci-fi as well. Though I do often read fantasy and other literary fictions and things like that. But science is kind of my jam. It's what I tend to like. So
The
it came
I'm
naturally to me, I guess. It just kind of fell out that way.
the thing that drives me nuts about science fiction is a lot of sci-fi readers want to have scientific explanations for the various things that are going on because it's part of the genre.
Yep.
And well, as all my regular followers know, I'm a fantasy guy at heart. So my immediate answer is it's just the magic system,
Yeah,
and
I
it
think that
doesn't always work.
I think in sci-fi, it's I mean so much of especially things that don't. If you talk about computers, all right, computers exist, and you can extrapolate a little bit further on. But if you get in much further than that, I mean, to some degree, it's fantasy, except that it needs to be plausible. I think that that's really, like, there's not somebody with like I don't know an orb that you're like spinning around and making it work. And it's like it just works. It's magic. Um, it just needs to be plausible. Though I remember a quote that my friend Chad used to say to me when we were in college. I think he got it from a book or something. That given enough time, there is no distinction between technology and magic. Which is to say, if you take somebody from, I don't know, the Middle Ages, and I don't know, you use that little twerpy thing to turn your car on, like
Mhm.
it's entirely magical. There's nothing within the realm of their understanding that could explain radio waves and how it works. And so, on one level, they're kind of they're sort of the same thing, fantasy and sci-fi.
Well, what you just said reminded me of something I ran across the other day. That magic is science that we don't understand yet.
Yeah, it's effectively the same idea. And I think that what it comes down to is, for me personally, I love to know how things work. Just kind of everything. I like to know how the lawnmowers work and cell phones work, and how perspective works in the eye. Like, I don't know, just stuff. I like to know stuff and how it actually works and manifests itself in reality. And so that's just the way that my mind works, and the way that if this plot device were to be true, what would need to happen to make that possible, without magic and elves and things. It's what kind of computer program, what kind of technology would need to be there. Can I explain it to myself in a way that I would find plausible? And if I can do that, then I'm happy. But I do spend a lot of time trying to convince myself that the technologies I write about could be real, and if not, I tweak them until they are. So.
Yeah, magic is so much an easier solution.
I,
um,
I have a story that's starting that I've kind of put in a back folder that is definitely not a science fiction story. It is definitely a fantasy and magic story, because there is a sort of quality to magic that it's not really just the plot device that you do. There's an atmosphere around magic and magical things that is kind of fun and sort of otherworldly, that in sci-fi, and especially in my book, like, it is very worldly. It's very much of this world, and just a future version of it. Whereas fantasy has a more misty quality to it that I do kind of enjoy as well. So.
yeah. Um, yeah, no, my the couple of science fiction ideas that I have floating around in my head. One of them, you guys can find on Undiscovered Title. The short story I have over on Amazon. Where I describe a type of chemical procedure that makes the cognitive swap happen.
Mm-hmm.
Between a former self and your present self.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not necessarily easy for me to do. It would have been a whole lot easier for me to just have like Merlin show up and say some magic words and all of it be taken care of. So it took me a while to try and figure that one out. But the dream that inspired it certainly helped on what was going on. Kind of gave me some insights there. And the other science fiction project I'm working on, well, that's a co-authorship, and my friend's doing all the sciencey stuff, and I'm doing all the writing.
Well, a lot of the science like that I had, there's mind swappy stuff in systemic too. In fact, that's a lot of what it's about. And there's some chemical stuff. And so I have a friend who's a chemical engineer, and I wrote her. Actually, it was like 3 a.m, and they said, "Hey, remember when they messed up thalidomide and they got the molecule? It was supposed to be a left-handed molecule, and it turned into a right one. Like, what's that called?" And I just sent her an email at 3 a.m, and she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" And chiral molecules, and I'm like, "That's it, thank you." She's like, "That's the F pattern of the thing." And so I was like, "Thank God." And so there's tons of stuff I don't know, but I know a lot of nerds, and so I can just know a lot. I know a lot of people who do like artificial intelligence stuff and systems learning stuff, or machine learning stuff. And I know chemists, and I know people that work in the railroads, and I know all these people, and I just kind of mine them for information. I say, "Hey, read this thing and tell me how stupid it is." And they say, "That's not how that works. You need to do it this way." And I'm like, if you look at the beginning of my book, I have a list of all the people who I thanked for all the things that they helped me. And it's railroads, restaurants, machine learning, AI, like all the different stuff that I have in there.
It sounds like you and I have a very similar superpower: finding people, befriending people who are more intelligent than we are in certain areas.
Yeah. That's definitely part of it, and I love it. I love hearing the things that people do, and the knowledge that they have. And my only hope is that I can represent it in a plausible way that doesn't sound like I'm just kind of making it up. So.
All right. Well, I could probably go on this with influence on writing and genres, but let's move on to who are your favorite authors and why?
Oh, that's a really good question, and it changes all the time, which is makes it even harder. So if I really want to go all the way back to people who've been around forever that I love, I love Neil Stephenson, I love Neil Gaiman, I Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite writers. I really enjoy reading all of his stuff. At least the stuff that I've read. When I was younger, Orson Scott Card, just basically because I love Ender's Game. So there's a whole ton of them. But the thing that keeps sneaking up on me are these new authors. I just read Tasman Muir's Gideon the Ninth, and I've decided she's probably one of my favorite authors in the world right now. Like, she's fantastic. And there's a guy named Gareth L. Powell who I've been following on Twitter. I don't know how I started following him, but I found him incredibly charming, and he's such a wonderful man. And so I just started reading his books. And Embers of War was his first one, and I thought it was just really good. And I, had a lot of overlap with sort of the ways that the technologies. It's a space opera, so my book is not a space opera at all. But sort of the ways, the personalities of the AIs and stuff that are in his book and mine had a lot of overlap, and I love that. Philip K. Dick is probably one of my favorite writers as far as the types of themes and sorts of things that he's interested in pursuing. Is very similar to the types of things I'm interested in. A lot of psychology, a lot of like what do memories mean, and if you're a cyborg or you have consciousness, those sorts of questions of consciousness and intelligence and artificial intelligence is something that I like a lot. So he's in there. And, you know, that's it. Right? There's tons of them. I could just keep going on and on.
Yeah, I set a rule for myself that I have to read and love at least 5 books from an author before I allow them to be a favorite author.
Yeah, it's
That's
fair. I'm
that's probably the only reason that Bram Stoker's not on that list is because
sure.
I've only read Dracula
Yeah.
from
Did he
him.
write anything else? I don't even know that Bram Stoker wrote anything else. So
If he did, it's been overshadowed by Dracula.
yeah, fair enough. Like, I think, didn't he write Family Circus? I think that was him who did the Family Circus. No,
Yeah.
that's the comic from like weird kids. So.
No, that was Bill Keane.
Yeah, you knew that? Okay, I didn't know.
No, Dracula's old.
I know Dracula's old. I read Dracula. Yeah, no, I've read Dracula. So.
That leads into that leads into Dracula actually is one of my top favorite. I've got 5 books that I absolutely love and adore. Dracula is actually on that list.
Yeah.
So I can't think of a better way to lead into what are your favorite books, Chris? I mean,
Oh, geez, that's a tough book, or tough question. So,
you
and
know
I'm
how many
probably,
times that's the immediate answer?
yeah, of course it is, and
You're asking what their favorite books are, and we are all avid readers.
yeah, and it's just what's going through my mind is like, I know that I've written all this for your blog, and you're gonna like cross reference and go, hey, that's not what he wrote before, because I don't know what he did last time. And again, I'm always very interested in the latest book I read, and like, oh, that was the best book in the entire world. I'm very enthusiastic. And so who knows what I said last time? But the books that were probably I'll start with this one. The book that I like pound the table and tell every young person to read is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, which is to me one of the best books ever, just because it's so complicated, it has such a great twist in it. It's just and I think it might have been the book that turned me on, frankly, to reading, let alone sci-fi. I had a friend in high school who's like, "You got to read this book; it's great." And I'm like, "I don't like reading. Reading is something I wouldn't want to do with myself." And he made me read it, and I'm like, "Oh, that was really fantastic." And I've been so it kind of started me on being a reader and wanting to be a writer in the first place. So that book is up there.
I loved Ender's Game, but I got to tell you, I loved Ender's Shadow better.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Ender's Game it's good. The whole series, like my wife and I read out loud to my wife every night. Like, her and I climb into bed and we read, and we went through a good portion of the Enders game. That whole series. I don't even know. It's like there's 6 books or something. It's a massive series.
Oh no, it's more. Let's see. You've got Ender's series. You've got the 4.
Yeah.
The Ender's Shadow, I think the Ender's Shadow is 6. The First Formic War is 3. I
Oh,
just Orson Scott Card just barely started doing the second Formic War, and I've only read the first 2 on that one. I haven't read the third one in the second Formic War. And then the plan is to bring together Ender's Shadows, the end of the Ender's Shadow series with the Ender's series. He's been talking about this for about 10 years.
yeah. So you're
And
obviously more well versed than I am in the Ender's universe. But so Ender's Game is one of them. A long time ago, like I got to read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy is one of the most beautifully written, terrible stories ever. Like, I don't know if you ever read any Cormac McCarthy, but he's like, wow, it's really beautiful the way he describes that person being brutally murdered. It's like, it's the weirdest thing. You're like, you just listen to the words, you're like, it's so pretty. And then you're like, he's writing such horrible things. And I really enjoy Cormac McCarthy's writing. And he wrote a very sparse book that I know you've heard of, called The Road, which is also pretty great. Like Cormac McCarthy, and those 2 books are very, very different, except that they're both really bleak. But their writing style, and to show that ability to change your style to almost like, this almost like Victorian, elaborately well written, stuff to almost like a Hemingway-esque, really short, curt language, and being able to do both of those so incredibly well. I like that a lot. I like Lord of the Rings. I can't get enough of that. Moby
oh
Dick.
yeah.
I don't know if you ever read Moby Dick, but man, that I'm so glad they never made me read that in high school, because I would have like kind of killed my teacher. But as an adult, where I have like kind of more patience and can appreciate what's being done with a book, when my daughter was a baby, like, when I woke up at 2 in the morning to take care of her, I read her Moby Dick while she kind of like, slept in my arms, and I loved it. It was so good and it's so wonderfully well written. Let me see.
I I couldn't do Moby Dick in print,
Yeah.
but I loved the audiobook.
Yeah, I
I
do a lot of, I mean, to be fair, I do a lot of audiobooks. Like I do a ton of them. Which, it's because, I have a very tight schedule. I work at Microsoft. I do my day job, which can be really long, and I don't do it now. But back when I was writing Systemic, I took the bus, and so I would walk from my house, 15-minute walk, take the bus to work, which I would write on the bus, and then I would work, and then I would come home and I would write on the way home from the bus, and then I would walk from the bus back home, which is another 15-minute walk. And so during that 15 minutes is the only time when I'm not writing, I'm not working, and I'm not, with my family. So those, I have to basically listen to audiobooks in order to get reading done. It's just the only time I can really do it. And so when I wrote Systemic, I wrote it very specifically to be an audiobook, because that's what I listen to. And so part of my writing process is, I read it out loud to myself. I read it out loud to my wife. I will often use words dictate, not dictate. Well, I use dictate too, but I actually like word will read to you, and I just kind of close my eyes and I listen to what's being said and go up. That didn't sound right. And so I care a lot about phrasing and the way things work, because I do expect my books to be audiobooks. So
That's fun.
it is
That's
fun.
fun. I love. There are so many classic literatures like Moby Dick that I I love the story. I love the plot, but when it comes to actually sitting down and reading it, I fall asleep before I get through the end of the first page. But then I do the audiobook. Last of the Mohicans was like that. I tried physically starting to read Last of the Mohicans 4 different times and failed every time, until I finally just been like, okay, I got to audiobook this, and I loved it.
Yeah. Audiobooks make it easy. Though I do find, like I just said, I read Gideon the Ninth, or listened to, I should say, Gideon the Ninth, and I did find myself like facing off and then going, whoa, I heard something, like a turn of phrase, or something that was really good, and I have to go back and listen to it over and over again. Because a lot of things, like I'm reading right now a nonfiction book, um, and a lot of that's just like listening to the radio, and I can let it go by. But when you have something really well written, like Tamara Mear's book, it's like I do want to hear what she said and how she phrased that particular thing, and so I've got to go back and listen. Of course, there's all these plot things that if you miss where the key was or something, you're like, oh wait, what was up with the key? So I got to rewind a bit. So, but and the last book I was thinking that was really influential on me was Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. I read that when I was like in early college, and that really got me. That probably sort of turned me into a nerd more than anything else. I think that there's a scene in there where they're talking about four-dimensional light cones, and I got it. And I'm like, oh, I got it. Like I just kind of like, oh, I understand it, and it just kind of like messed with my brain in a way that I love. That was probably. I think that's 5. I think maybe 6.
Yeah, the book that really got me started to really enjoy reading was A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens.
Yeah. Oh,
that was anyone who's followed me before, you'll hear me toad about how awesome that book is time and time again. I listen to it every year after Thanksgiving. But I listen to I listen to the audiobook. I listen to Patrick Stewart's retelling. I watch at least 3 different versions of it every year. Like everybody who follows me knows how much I love it. And one of the biggest reasons that I love it so much is because that is what got me really reading.
Yeah, there are some books I remember in college. Just when there was these books, The Great Gatsby was also one where like I got that book. Like I'm like I get like where the symbolism. Those books when you realize there's something going on in a book besides a bunch of words that tell a story, and you're like, oh, I get where they're going with this, and there's still a story there. It's a good story, but then there's all these other things that are going on, and to have like a literary teacher that's able to point those things out and bring that extra depth in there. And yeah, Dickens is one. Anytime you study, especially classic literature, when you're young, they don't really tie them to history. They're just like this book that is awful that you have to read, and then you go to history class. And when you're in college and you're studying literature, a lot of times they combine those two things, and so you actually get this understanding of the depth of what's going on at the moment when that book is written. And there's so many books like that. Dickens is great, and a bunch of things. It all comes together and it makes sense. And I just love those moments in my education.
Yeah. So moving on to the next question. Who are your favorite literary characters?
Oh gosh. I'm gonna jump back to again being charmed by the things I've read of late, and I mean these ones honestly, and it's not just because that they're pertinent to my mind. I really enjoyed Gideon the Knight as a character. I thought she was incredibly entertaining and fun. There's a book called The Girl Who Drank the Moon, which is a young fantasy book, and there's a dragon in there called Firion. I think that's how you pronounce it. And he's very small, but he thinks he's very big, and that everyone else around him is really big. And so, because dragons are huge, and the fact that he's the size of like a sparrow, he thinks that all the people around him are enormous. Because and he's the sweetest little guy, and he's really fun. Owen Meany from who's that? Irving, who did A Prayer for Owen Meany. Owen Meany's a great character. I'm trying to think of some of the another one. This Gareth L. Powell guy wrote this book, The Embers of War, and A Fleet of Knives, and the ship AI in that, who's named Trouble Dog, is a great character. And I think maybe when you asked me this question before, I said that, and I wrote to Gareth L. Powell and said, "Hey man, I just want you to know that I was asked like what my favorite literary characters were, and I mentioned Trouble Dog, and all of his fans on there was like, hey man, like she's mine, like you can't have her." And like this guy, he had to break it to his wife that if he would marry this, And so I'm like, it's not just me. Like everybody loves this character. And so I don't know if that's, and then of course there's, I don't know, Silas Marner. I remember loving when I read that book and just thought that was a really interesting character back in the day. And I don't know, there's so many good characters out there. So yeah,
Yeah,
lots of them.
so many. A lot of I find myself in my own writing finding inspiration for my own characters from my favorite literary characters, and as I was writing Denizens Among Us, I'm specifically thinking Denizens Among Us. I kept thinking, what would Eponine do? Eponine Thénardier from Les Mis. Les Mis is also on my list of favorite books.
Mhm.
Eponine is my favorite. I absolutely love Eponine. She's my absolute one of three absolute favorite characters.
I'm not going to hold you to it, man. It's fine.
You can hold me to it. She's one of three absolute favorite characters, and they're all tied for each other. And I don't tell the other two about Eponine because they all get jealous of each other. But,
Sure.
Eponine is phenomenal. And I kept thinking as I'm writing, right? I kept thinking about my character Amarith, Arcturus Hunter's twin sister. What would Eponine have done in this situation? Well, what would happen? And then when I wrote, in fact, that whole question is to how would Eponine relate to what's going on here? Pretty much started off the thought process that created the Viscount of Sternboard,
Hmm.
my novella that's on there. And all I'm saying is that our favorite literary characters, just as they make such an impact
Mhm.
with me on what I'm putting together on my stories.
Mhm.
And what you're saying about the AI, I mean, that's just makes so much dramatic impact on where we are, what we are doing in our own writing worlds. And that's why I ask about literary characters,
Mhm.
because you find someone's favorite and if someone's favorite literary character is all about the secondary hero, if someone's favorite literary characters is all the Ginny Weasleys and the Neville Longbottoms, then that's my type of person, because they're all about the undersung heroes. They're all about the guys that you don't see very much.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say that because when I think about it, well, the Trouble Dog is pretty front and center to that particular story, but like Fiery and the Dragon is not he's not what the book is about. But I just think he's really funny and I enjoy it a lot. But I also like Wilbur. I like Wilbur from Charlotte's Web. Like I love
Yeah,
characters that are just sincere and like I yeah Frodo. Those types of things. Like they're but you also Samwise second character right. Like I like these characters. They're good.
a lot of people love Samwise. I'm
Yeah,
I'm, I'm one of them.
yeah. You can't
He's
be like
awesome.
that Samwise guy's a jerk.
I don't think you can ever hear anybody ever say that.
Yeah, exactly. I hate Samwise. Like, get a job. What do you say about Samwise Gamgee?
So, moving on, is there anything you want to share with your potential readers?
Oh, well, my book would be great if they read it because I love it. Yeah, so I guess I'll tell people what the book is about, or the things that I think are interesting about it. The book is really about uh, it asks about a couple things. It asks about technology and what even if technology does wonderful things for us, which I'm a fairly optimistic technical person. I work with tech and all these things. What if everything works perfectly and technology solves all of our problems, like literally solves all of our problems? Would we be happy as human beings? And the thesis of the book is that no, we would not. We would be miserable. If all of our problems were solved for us, we would not be happy. And that's kind of the background of the book and what it is. So the AI, our scary AI overlords in the book are actually not particularly scary. In fact, they're very beneficial. And I made the AIs very benevolent to more talk about humanity and how we can make our own dystopia, even given the perfect situation. So it's an AI book and it's kind of a dystopian book, but it's also a utopian book. And I'm really kind of playing around sort of what it means to be a human. And so that's a big part of the book. Um, there is also the thing that I was surprised about the book is where it takes place. And so usually in sci-fi, there's these whole memes of, large sprawling dystopian cyberpunk, you know, new Tokyos or something like that. And that's not at all what is happening in my book. There's a little bit of cityscapes in there, but not very many. The vast majority of my books takes place out in what I call the Sagelands, which is sort of Idaho, Montana, Eastern Washington sort of area, basically the dry West, where the sage is, and these small little towns, one of which is called Hamer Falls. And the reason it's called Hamer Falls is because I was looking at where approximately it would be on the map, and I found Idaho Falls, and went, oh, I'll call it Hamer Falls. And so, which is funny. I know you're in Idaho Falls, and I was going to mention.
I actually am in Idaho Falls.
I was like, that's funny. So a lot of the book, like, it's sci-fi and tech, but a lot of it's what I call rural sci-fi. And I pretty quickly got interested in the idea of what does the future going to look like in towns of 200 people. Like, the future shows up there too, but do they still have burger restaurants and and bars and small one stoplight towns? And so a lot of the book happens in those sorts of places out in the rural areas, and it's a very vast and open story. And then there's some fun twists in there, and there's there's some good sci-fi. People have given me a lot of credit for the sci-fi and how strong it actually is, but there's a lot of stuff about emotion and sort of motivations of characters and why they would or wouldn't do the things that they're doing, and that all kind of plays into the book and the technology and what the technology is actually doing. So a lot of things that I thought were fairly unique about the story itself that made it really fun to write, and a lot of people find very surprising and delightful. So I hope people check it out and enjoy that.
So, are you doing any follow-up book to Systemic? Are you doing it part of a series? Are you doing any side stories off of it, or any other anything fun like that?
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for asking. I did a short story that I kind of put it in the same universe as it because there's some nice little sort of mental transfer stuff that happens in the book and some technologies that I thought would be really interesting for a different story I wanted to write. So I wrote a short story recently, and I'm shopping around right now, called, I think it's called How I Broke the Empathy Network, and it's about social media. And it's like this social media site that doesn't share, pictures of cats and videos of your grandma. Instead, you upload experiences, and you can put this octopus contact rig on your head, and you can actually feel the emotions and the experience of the person, and what that does to you as a human being, to actually put yourself into somebody else's position like that, and how it's really not conducive to flame wars on Facebook, when you can actually understand the motivation behind even pretty appalling people when you get down to it. And so I wrote this short story that like I said, I'm shopping that around. And I am writing the sequel to Systemic that kind of takes off right where Systemic ends. And it is, it's not as science fiction-y because part of the whole, well, I don't want to give away the end of Systemic, but it doesn't have quite as much science in it, and technology is the first one by design. And so it's more of just sort of a post-apocalyptic sort of thing going on. I shouldn't give away too much, but anyway, so that's what's going on. And I thought it was just going to be one book, but as I've been writing it, the other day I found the spot where I think it cleaves into two books, and so I'm writing basically a series of 3 books. I thought I was just doing 2. Now it's a series of 3.
And as soon as you get started on the 3rd one, you'll find a 4th and a 5th.
Yeah, no, it turns out I'm actually started on the 3rd one. That's what I was because I get this book and I started writing it, and I'm like, good God, this thing's getting big and big and big. It was getting massive, and I'm like, gosh. And then I found that it breaks right here. I can see it's like a hair parting, and I'm like, oh, right there is a natural break in the book. And so I will have almost I'll probably have the second and third book written at approximately the same time. I'll finish the second one obviously first, and then the third one. But it's already all outlined and kind of ready to flesh out. So that's where I'm at with it.
That you know, kind of funny saying you saying that reminds me of an interview that I heard with Card. You know, talking about Enderverse. That's exactly what happened with Xenocide and Children of the Mind.
Mm-hmm.
It was just supposed to be a 3-part book, and then he got writing the third one, and he's like, "This is so long, I have to cut it in half. Where do I cut it at? Where do I cut it at?" And you know, I remember that interview, him talking about that that process, and very, very reminiscent of what you just said. Very similar.
And I was surprised when I got Systemic, you know, back here, how big it was. Like I was like, I had no idea how big of a book it actually was. You know, I wrote it like all in Word or whatever, and then I got it printed. It was like heavy and big. I'm like, I expected it to be a pamphlet. Like I just, it's massive. It's about average for a sci-fi book, but I was surprised at how big it was. And my new book is, I've been writing it for about 9 months, and it's almost as long already. And I'm like, and it's not even. I feel like I'm just starting it, so I'm like, it's got to be broken up. So.
Yep. No, on book lengths, I always knew that for what I was writing, right? Like, just kind of how you were saying with Systemic, it just became science fiction because of what's going on here.
Yep.
Well, as I was writing The United, I wasn't originally shooting for science fiction, or I wasn't originally shooting for fantasy. I was just writing to write.
Yep.
And as the story was written and as the story was going, it became very, very, very painfully obvious that it was a YA fantasy.
Yep.
I couldn't get away from YA. It is top to bottom YA fantasy. And so I started doing some digging and research on YA fantasy titles and saw that I needed to be somewhere around 70,000 words.
Yep.
A lot of publishers I was shopping for said, if your book is over 70,000 words and you're a YA fantasy, then I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
And so
know better than we do, right? It's like, but my book's special. Is like, not for marketing. It's not.
Yeah.
You know, is the answer there.
I wasn't able to make it under 75,000 words. Like I wasn't able to get it under that.
Yeah.
But end of the day, said about 75,000 words. Found a publisher who's willing to take a chance on it. 70, and you know, you're sitting right about that length. But the reason I'm saying that is because when I came out with Denizens is somewhere right around that same range, right? Mm-hmm. Then Perfectly Evil, that's coming out here in a few days. It comes out on December 22nd. I was lucky if I was able to get that sucker up to 60,000 words.
Yeah.
Like the story itself just dictated the size.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Systemic is like 280,000 words, like massive. Like
so you are sitting pretty good for science fiction.
Yeah, it's right. You know, in science fiction, I think it does have a lot more leeway because, you know, like I read. You know, I also think in time, Systemic is a 13.5 hour long book on Audible, right?
Yeah.
But I was reading. I was listening to Neil Stephenson's Fall the other day, and I think that was like 22 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you imagine when it's published, it's like a tome, and yeah, he writes long books. And so like I know that sci-fi is it's a little bit more than YA, but like even the Harry Potter books, the first one was like kind of skinny, and then you kind of see it on the shelf, and they just kind of get. It's like exponentially larger as it goes until it's like, it looks like the world's worst encyclopedia. It's like,
well, that's because she goes from children's fantasy to YA fantasy.
Yeah, that's just true. Yeah.
Hey, you see and then by the time you get to book 7, you're not even YA fantasy anymore. You're just straight epic fantasy.
Yeah.
And you can do whatever you want in size on, just like with science fiction. As long as the story is good, you do whatever you want on size with that.
You run with it. It's fine. Yeah.
You know, look at Wheel of Time. Every single one of them is like a 20-hour audiobook.
Yeah. Yeah.
Epic fantasy all the way through. So anyway, yeah, it's just it's always fun hearing other people's other authors talk about how their books turned into the length and styles that they ended up doing. Just letting the story dictate it, letting the story dictate, you know.
Yeah, when I started just on that subject, when I started writing, one of my favorite things to say about Systemic is it's the first book I've written since I was in college. It took a long, and just one day on the bus, like my battery died on my phone and my laptop, and I had nothing to do, so I started writing something pretty, like, and then I kept writing. I wrote it. I read it to my wife when I got home, and I'm like, it's kind of fun. I'm just gonna keep writing. And then I had like 20 pages. I'm like, Jesus, 20 pages. This is gonna be a pretty long short story. And after a while, I'm like, I'm 90 pages into it, and it's a sci and then I just kept writing, and all of a sudden I'm like, holy crap, I have a book. Like that's literally what happened. And I'm like, it's pretty good. I'll go back and edit it, and I edit it and I edit it, and it's but it really went from I'm writing a pretty picture of a thing in my mind of somebody standing in a valley in basically Montana, and that's it. And it's like there's a river, and I described it, and that was his first thing, and I really liked it, and it just from there it turned into this massive sci-fi book. And it was just I was surprised by the whole thing, if I'm being honest. And so that's what happened.
Uh, Montana is very. I lived over in Billings for a while, and did a lot of traveling. The job that I had took me from Butte to Glendive, so pretty much the entire width of the state. And I got to see a lot of Montana. Really, really, really pretty. Very open. Very
Yep.
open. Fantastic place for a story about small one-stop gas station stops off the interstate towns.
Yep. Yeah, and that's exactly what happened with my book. It just so much of my book just reminded me of places I'd seen in Montana and Idaho and Eastern Washington and down through down into Utah and places like that. Just driving around and going to Burning Man and stuff, and stopping at these tiny little towns, and it's just like it kind of got stuck into my head when I was younger, I think, and it just all came out in the book. So
Well, and I love the perspective that you added to it. I know this is kind of going off the specific question, but I love the perspective you put into it that the future comes to the small towns too. So what happens to them?
yeah,
I just on the face value, I love that concept.
yeah,
I think that's awesome because a lot of the times it is. This is New York City. This is what happened in New York City. This is my friend Tasani Odette just did one that was in Seattle. Released it about a year ago, Twisting Minds, and still big city, but I thought, oh good, at least it's not on the East Coast.
yeah. It's not Tokyo. Yeah,
Not Tokyo, not New York, not DC. This is at least it's on the West Coast.
yeah, and it actually none of the places in my book are real. Like I don't intend them to be, but one of the first scenes in the book, actually the first scene in the book, is in a place that's kind of one of the. It's either in some place like Portland or someplace like Ballard over in Seattle, and it's like just that's kind of where I had it in mind. And so even when you're in the towns, it's like the old industrial districts and kind of the abandoned parts of town, not the skyscrapers and people with like flying hovercrafts going through the cities, and it's nothing like that. It's not a big glass and steel kind of novel. It's old parts of town and then small towns and rural areas kind of novel, which if that's how it works. That's just what happened, and I liked it. So I like the aesthetic of it. Have you ever seen Tales from the Loop? On
Yes, yes.
That reminds me a lot. That I watched that series, or at least I started to after I wrote my book, and I'm like, somebody else gets it. It's these weird towns, right? And like it's like a lot like that. And there's another book that was another movie actually that I watched called Everything Beautiful is Far Away, which I don't know if you've seen that, but it's like this two.
That I have not.
Yeah, it's kind of an arty film. It's neat. It's mostly very it has an aesthetic to it, and it's these two people that meet walking around in the desert, and it's mostly I think there's three entire human beings in the whole movie. But I was like, yeah, I kind of it's a little bit like my story in a way. I like the harshness of it. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, that's always fun. Final question is, where can we go to learn more about you and your literary works?
Well, there's only one literary work at the moment, so there's only one place to go. You could go to chrislodwigauthor.com. You can go there and you'll see my website. And of course, you can always go to Amazon.com and look up Systemic. Systemic has a lot of things associated with it, so you might want to put my author name as well, which is Chris, because there's systemic product management and systemic racism and systemic this. It's like I picked a time to name a book systemic, but I'm sure a bunch of people have read it by accident, thinking it had something to do with something that it didn't. So,
Well, there you go. That's always a fun way to go.
yeah,
I
free beer, and if you name it free beer, I was like, really? How does that happen? And they read it. It's an old trick, but.
you're right. When someone's looking, when I'm looking for my book on Amazon, seeing reviews or whatever it is I'm looking at for the United, the title of my first book is The United, the Realm of the Light, book 1, right? And I always have to write The United Maservi, because I always get, when I just type in The United, same thing when I type in The United, I get the United States of America,
Yeah.
the founding of the United States of America, the history of the signers of the independence of the United States of America, and then other random things dealing with that. So I also chose a bad. I completely get putting in the author name next to the title.
It's not Harry Potter. Like there's only. But the other thing that was amazing to me, because Systemic became the name of my book really early on. Like it was kind of my working title. I'm like, then it got to the point like, what the hell am I going to name this book? And I was like, because I kind of want to name it Systemic, but that's taken. And I looked, and it wasn't. I'm like, how is there not a sci-fi book named Systemic out there? That's insane. It's such an obvious sci-fi title, and maybe it's because everyone's like, that's such an obvious sci-fi title. It's like calling a band, but there are no other sci-fi books called Systemic, so I got lucky there. So.
I knew it was sci-fi just by the title. I mean,
Yeah.
if that helps you out.
Yeah, and me too. It's like actually the title, it actually means in the book, the system, which I was embarrassed to do this until I figured out why it happened. But the system is the name of the AI, and it's like, oh, that's so bad. Oh, it's just like all that. But the story behind it is actually that when the people were developing it, they just called it the system, and then when it broke out of wherever it was, it's like, I had to log on to the internet, and it's like, what's your name? And he's like, the system. And it's like, okay, that actually works. It's not a totally like the most generic horrible name for a thing. It's like there's a story behind it. And the actual term systemic is becomes, because what this AI does is it first cuts its teeth in the world by helping people discern truth, because there's so much BS in the world right now, which is kind of one of the things I was writing about, is like there is no more objective truth in the world, which is very bothersome and very problematic. And the thing that the system was really good at doing is discerning fact from fiction. And so pretty quickly, the term systemic means true or truthful. And so the title of the book could also be translated as truthful or accurate. So
That's a real. We should have put that up in the previous conversation with the anything to share with potential readers, because that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, I did think about it.
I love that. I love that little twist. Well, I'm certain that I'm using up all of the time that you guys had to watch in the interviews with me. So I think we gotta cut this. Cut.
Yep, cut it out.
Yep, cut it out. Thank you for joining with me, Chris. Thank you for talking me into trying this again.
Yeah, hope it gets correctly.
We'll see. We'll see if I find anyone else willing to give this a shot. If any other authors out there want to get online with me, just let me know. JQM. Just let me know either on my website, jqmserve.wordpress.com, or jqm.serv@gmail.com, and reach out to me, and we'll schedule a time to make this happen. And Chris, I'm sorry that we had to reschedule once. That my schedule, as I told you when we first started, between November and from Halloween to New Year's, my schedule is just slammed.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I was able to make this happen. And if I get off right now, I have plenty of time to go grocery shopping, and then my day's over. So
thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And hello to all your listeners. Thanks for being there. Good to talk to you. All right. Stop reading.